welcome to the Forsters More Than Law podcast. I'm Miri Stickland, Knowledge Development Lawyer in the Commercial Real Estate team, and joining me today are Emily Holdstock, who's a Senior Associate in our construction team, together with Tamsin Collingridge, who is a first-year trainee in our construction team, but obviously exudes the confidence of a second-year trainee, because that's what I thought she was. Hello.
Morning.
Welcome. Emily and Tamsin have agreed to join me today to talk about the special relationship between trainees and their supervisors. So for the uninitiated, Helen Marsh is our training principal here at the firm, and so she's got overall responsibility for trainees. But could you explain how trainee supervisors play a different role in sort of mentoring trainees? Emily, do you want to start?
I can indeed. So the idea behind training supervisors, I think, has been in train for a while. I know in CRE there have been some trials and people have been looking after trainees on a kind of more informal basis. But I know that in the feedback that Nicole, who's head of our L&D here, and that Helen had got was from the trainees, was that it would be really useful to have somebody in the department that the trainee can come to really as a first point of call for any questions that you might have, whether that's a legal question, so for us a construction related question, or a query about how you might go about doing a piece of research, or even just what I would call kind of silly questions like, where's the waste paper bin, where can I hang my coat? And you laugh, Miri, but that was when I was a trainee, that was what I was nervous about, was asking that kind of questions. So we always try and make trainees feel at ease, and it's just nice, I think, to have someone answer those questions, particularly if, I know, Tam, you've had a bit of kind of life experience after university, but when I was a trainee, I joined Forsters at sort of 22, not having had a job really before, and just working in an office is massively different, isn't it? It's just something you need to get used to.
Yeah, it's true. It took me, I remember as a trainee, ages to try and work out who was a partner and who I could get to sign checks, and I basically just did it off how old do they look,
which is not actually,
which doesn't always work.
No, absolutely. So for us, the role has it's still taking shape, but the way that I manage it, so I look after Tam, who is our contentious trainee, and we also have a trainee, Nick, who is our non-contentious trainee, who one of my colleagues looks after. And what Dan and I did was we sat down at the beginning of the seat and we just gave Tam and Nick an overview of who is in the team, who's a partner, who's not a partner, for us, who does contentious work and who does non-contentious work, because that's obviously directly relevant to the work that Nick and Tam would be doing. And just an expectation, I suppose, of how we thought the next 4 months might pan out in our team. And then something that we also do is that the training supervisor is now responsible for doing mid-seat appraisals. So Tam and I sat down and did that. And we also do the end-of-seat appraisals with the partner. And that's a little bit of a more formal process before the trainee moves on to the next team.
And just explain how it was structured before this more sort of, because I think a lot of firms do and have for a long time operated on a kind of trainee supervisor basis. But actually, for example, when you were a trainee, it was slightly different.
It was just a bit more informal, I think. So there was always someone around to ask questions of, but it's quite nice, I think, when you first go into a department, particularly I think if it's a big department. We're quite small and we still have offices at the moment, so the obvious person for Tam to ask a question to would be me, because we share a room. But in a bigger floor, you might feel a bit more nervous about it, I suppose. So previously, I would just ask whoever was kind of around.
Yeah.
And then the end-of-seat appraisal and the mid-seat appraisal was done by a partner. But I think actually it's part of the change is obviously because it's direct trainee feedback, and the person who does the appraisal ought to be the person who's kind of seeing day-to-day what's happening, and quite often partners are out doing BD or at lunches and meetings and things. So having someone who's observing kind of trainee behaviour all the time, I think, is quite helpful.
I think you've kind of, you've answered that one pretty well, haven't you? What else was I going to say? Yeah, basically that we get one for each department we go in, so I think that's a nice continual kind of theme that every seat we go in, we will get dedicated supervisor.
And does it always tend to be a senior associate who's...
I'm not sure.
I think there's a range. I think most of us are probably senior associates, but I think it's just people who have expressed an interest in looking after trainees.
Yeah, and I think it's, yeah, like you said, you're my day-to-day contact really for anything, so I don't necessarily get given the most work from Emily, but because she is there, it's really useful if it's just a very quick, simple question rather than kind of bothering the person who's giving you the piece of work. Just be like, you know, ask Emily and she can tell me straight away, I can carry on with it. And just other like non-work things as well has been really useful. Like I think maybe before that, when you're finding your feet in your first seat, you wouldn't necessarily know kind of who to ask for just the really simple day-to-day stuff, like how to book off holiday, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And rather than bothering L&D or Helen or HR with it, then someone who's been at the firm for a while who can just say, I'll just do that and that, then it's been really useful.
Good to have someone around who's kind of got that knowledge as
definitely.
second nature.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely.
So what are the kind of tasks that you might delegate to a trainee, and how would you go about supervising, Emily?
So there is nothing that I wouldn't delegate to a trainee. It really depends what we've got coming in. So I do contentious and non-contentious work, but because Tam is our contentious trainee, I primarily exclusively give her contentious work. So it might be anything from drafting letters, first drafts of letters that we might be sending out, or drafting notices or a research task. It really just depends what my workload's looking like. So I suppose a couple of recent examples would be that we had a client who wanted to deduct LADs because so that's liquidated damages for a building contract where the contractor was running late, and so there's a financial penalty on the contractor for that, and so they wanted to deduct that from money that they would have otherwise had to pay the contractor that month. And there is a series of contractual notices that you have to send to be able to do that, and it's quite fiddly. So what Tam did for me was check the contractual provisions, just made sure that we were following the right procedure, that the notices got sent in the right order, that we were sending them in the right way, because some of them can go by email, some of them can't, some of them have to go by special delivery. And then Tam had a bash at drafting all of the notices to make sure they all contained all the right things. So it was hugely helpful to me, because that's it's quite a time consuming exercise when you take all the kind of little questions into consideration about how it's served and who it's addressed to and which address it goes to, all those sorts of things. So Tam did a great job of those. And then some research as well. So one of the clients that we're working with at the moment had a question about what is practical completion, when is a building actually finished, and there's been a case on that this year. So Tam did some really helpful research on that and produced a note for us, and parts of that I then extracted and shared with the client in a meeting and then in written advice. So any other kind of pearls, Tam? What else have we done together?
Make you a daily cup of tea.
I'd just like to clarify for the record that I do not insist that my my trainees make me tea.
Yeah,
Tam and I drink a lot of tea.
We do.
And she's trying to convert me to blackcurrant or something else horrible.
Ooh,
but I just
please.
want builders.
Just want a Sam.
Yeah, I'll go for the posh stuff. No PG tips here.
Do you find when Emily's giving you tasks, it kind of helps if you've got some context around it, rather than, so, you know, the example you're just giving of the notices, did you kind of talk about the context of it beforehand?
Yeah, absolutely. Emily's really good at that. I think she has kind of like a stock system on how she gives work, in that she would always give us
my name, clues in the name, Tam Holdstock.
a full brief overview of the matter to date, because then you can really conceptualise it as a trainee, and it really helps, especially with contentious work, because a lot of it is you get given something that's quite standalone, and then it goes back to your supervisor, and sometimes it's hard to see where it fits in the overall picture. So Emily's great at kind of saying, okay, this is what needs doing, this is why it's really useful, and then after it's done, kind of feeding back again and say kind of this how it's slotted in and how it helped the client. So yeah, I'd say that's one thing that Emily does really well.
It's kind of good to know what role you're actually playing in this sort of larger transaction, isn't it?
The way I always view it is that ultimately the idea behind being a trainee is to develop into a qualified lawyer, and when you're a qualified lawyer you're going to be responsible for either discrete parts of a transaction initially and eventually the whole thing. And if you haven't been taught the context, how can you possibly ever learn the skills that you need to develop? So I think it's really important, and it was something that I always appreciated when I was a trainee. You were probably the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think otherwise you just don't really... Actually, I think in a way it makes you add importance to the task that you're doing, because, you know, some of the tasks can seem really dull when you're just photocopying or bibling or whatever, which I know now tends to go more to sort of admin. But it's good to know that actually there is a purpose for that, and why it's really important that you get these sort of tasks that seem unimportant, you know, right.
Yeah, and Tom and I were chatting about that actually, and the way I view that is that I would never delegate a piece of work that I couldn't do myself and that I didn't know how to do myself. And so what I said to Tam was, even if it is a task, I don't know, compiling a bundle for council or something like that, it's really useful for her to have done that exercise, so that if ever she can't do it, or she needs to give it to someone else when she's qualified, or she explains to admin, she knows what format she wants it in, how it kind of looks, so that she can give those instructions clearly enough to pass them on. So I think even if it's a kind of a mundane task, always to kind of get as much learning from it as you can.
Good approach.
Yeah, very good.
So what are the things that you're finding most valuable in the kind of context of trainee-supervisor relationship, other than learning how to make very strong tea?
Other than finding the perfect amount of milk. Well, I think we're quite unique in construction that we sit in individual rooms. So obviously I sit directly with Emily, and it's just us two. So it's really easy for me to ask advice on kind of the stupid stuff that if you were a kind of open plan you might not kind of be as confident to do, and it is the first seat trainee. I think that's been so helpful.
Yeah.
But also kind of Emily's senior associate, and she does work pretty much with everyone in the department, so some days it can be a bit of a thoroughfare, people coming in probably every I don't know how you get work done, every half an hour asking advice, but being able to sit and listen to how she gives advice to people that are older in the department, and how they interact with her, how Emily manages her workload, and she's got kind of lots of conflicting stuff coming in, and also calls coming to clients. She's really helpful that she normally puts them on loudspeaker for me, so even if I'm doing something else, I can kind of hear how she's approached it, how they're talking to her about the matter. So yeah, that's been a really useful experience, actually being in the same room as her.
So Emily, if you were going to describe your ideal trainee, what are the attributes that you kind of most value in the trainees that you supervise?
I think there are two. So for me, listening, I think, is the most important skill for any trainee. So when you're giving instructions to somebody, it's so important that the trainee looks like they're listening, and obviously that they are listening, because it's really unnerving when you're giving someone work and they're looking around, or they're, you know, not taking notes. So that probably leads on to the next thing, is that I would say to any trainee, and we do say at the start of every seat to the trainees, carry around your pen and paper everywhere, because a lot of what we're saying is quite technical, and we might talk about clause references in a contract, and there's no way you can remember all of that. So I always say to the trainee, carry your pen and paper around, write everything down, and I'm a bit pedantic, I suppose, because quite often, I mean, it's not as contrived as this in real life, but quite often I do ask the trainees to parrot back the instructions so that I can check that they understand what I've asked them to do, and make sure they're not going to just go off and waste time doing something that I haven't asked for. And we also always set down, don't we, timescales for giving work back. So all of that, if it's written down, I think is quite helpful.
Yeah.
But also I think for a supervisor, for any supervisor, I think having a trainee who is willing to get stuck in and willing to work hard and looks interested and looks like they're enjoying themselves, because there's nothing worse than sitting with a trainee who's just giving you nothing back and not asking any questions. And I quite often say to trainees, it might be you know everything about construction law, you might be better at it than me, but just ask some questions. Ask about why you've done something in a certain way, or why was the client happy with that piece of advice, or any information you can get like that. And I think that if a trainee appears engaged, I think they get so much more from.
Slightly off piece, but do you find, I mean, when I trained, I was in property finance for my first seats, and I mean, I was terrible at land law at law school. I just about passed my land law exam. Had no desire at all to be a property lawyer at the time, but just absolutely loved it. Do you find that people come in with kind of quite a fixed mindset about whether they're going to enjoy construction, or that, you know, maybe actually aspirationally they're thinking they know from the start which department they might want to qualify into?
I think they probably do. I mean, I certainly, speaking from personal experience, like that's exactly what happened to me. I was convinced. I mean, obviously Forsters is very well known for private client and real estate work, and I thought I wanted to be a private client or a family lawyer. I was pretty sure that that's what was for me. I'd loved family law at university, and I really liked the private client electives at law school. So I was pretty sure that was what was going to happen. And when I was, in my day, you couldn't pick which seat you wanted to go to, you were just given. And I was given construction as my second seat, having done private client. And I was like, what's construction law? Because you don't it's not something that you would study at university, and you kind of do it in passing in some of the advanced electives on the LPC, but I didn't really know what it was. So I think it's not necessarily a preconception that you're not going to like it. It's a kind of mindset, well, what is it? Is it for me? What kind of skills am I going to need? And actually all it is contract. It's commercial contracts, essentially. And then obviously the litigation side is just commercial litigation, but about a specific subject matter.
Yeah. But do you find that people, when they come in with a sort of more open mindset, they kind of tend to get more out of it? Are they the trainees that you kind of see flying?
I think so, and I think Tam's probably one of those, because I know, Tam, you think you might want to be a litigator, don't you?
Yeah, I've loved it. I think from getting views from other trainees from years above, I think construction has got a bit of a bad reputation, which is completely unfounded, because I think it is the technical, and because people don't really know about it. It doesn't fit into property, it doesn't fit into private client, it's kind of on its own. But actually if you go there with a completely open mind and look at it for what it actually is, it's a really interesting area to actually learn.
Yeah.
And I think also because it's so busy and there's so much work that's coming in on the contentious and non-contentious side, I think for trainees they delegate so many tasks that actually you might not get in other departments.
Yeah.
And I think they give you a lot more responsibility, and if you show that you are keen and you've enjoyed it and you want that responsibility, they're really happy for you to kind of go away and kind of draft anything that they would, and then they'll take it back.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really unique kind of department that there is both sides, contentious, non-contentious, so you can really see how they fit in and how they fit together. Because for the contentious, if you don't understand the documents that are primarily non-contentious, you're not really going to understand why someone can sue on them.
Yeah.
So to have that balance has been really, really interesting.
Well, I think that's the best thing about construction. That's my little plug for the construction team. For any trainees listening to this, is that it's actually one of the only departments, I think, in the firm where you can do contentious and non-contentious. And I do both. I historically did a lot of non-contentious, well, solely non-contentious.
Yeah.
And now it's probably not quite 50-50, but not far off. And you can balance both. And I do think Tam's exactly right. You have to understand the documents and how they work to be able to litigate on them effectively. I think to sort of have some kind of grounding in the non-contentious side is very important.
So it sounds like you are. I mean, my next question was going to be about kind of, are you clear about the expectations of you as a trainee at Forsters? But it sounds like in terms of kind of work types, workload, you are. What about kind of other activities outside the kind of strict sort of work fee earning side of things?
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday, weren't we? And I think there is a definite expectation of Forsters that as a trainee you should try and get involved as many things as you can. And I don't think that's like a daunting prospect because it's so easy to do. There's so many different like, you could join committees, you can join charity, there's like book club, there's all the like
choir.
sport, there's choir, there is literally, you can
Get your choir plug in as well.
Have you been?
No, I went once. I think they'd have kicked me out even had I actually decided to stick with it. EDI committee I sit on,
you
which
sit on
is
that.
a good one. You're on the
I'm
green
on the
committee,
green
aren't
on
you,
book
Tam?
club.
The
Yeah.
EDI committee.
Equality, diversity and inclusion. Yeah.
And I know
that's
you're
quite
on
new.
green committee
I'm on
because you
green,
served
yeah.
me a very nice halloumi breakfast.
Glad to hear it, get the green plug in. And I'm also in book club. I think the type of people that Forsters attract are those that don't just want to sit at their desk every day and have no kind of outside experience. And I think the firm is really good at allowing people to kind of dip into loads of different things. I think kind of on the first day it was made quite clear that you only get out what you put in, and I think you've got 2 years and it's quite like a kind of an interesting 2-year process, and because we move much more frequently than other firms, I think if you can try and work as hard as you can and make the most of those 4 months, then when you move you've got a really good foundation on kind of the previous one, and you can just keep kind of building on that.
Yeah.
And I think because the work is so interlinked with all the different departments, that if you can really try and kind of meet as many people in the different departments in the extracurricular, then it really helps you when you're building up and you're moving seats, because obviously it can be a bit daunting now, having sat with Emily for 4 months, to think, well, I'm now going to a brand new department where I don't actually know that many people. But if you can really try and meet as many of the different people in different departments, then it makes that kind of transition so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking of moves, that means you've got your end of seat appraisal coming up soon.
Yeah, all booked in.
How do you kind of, do you provide feedback on an ongoing basis? I mean, it sounds like you do. And how do you kind of approach the review process?
I think it's really important to give feedback as you're going along, because certainly even for me now, when I get feedback from the partners on work, it's useful to have the feedback immediately after you've completed a task. Otherwise, if you waited till the end of seat appraisal, that might be 2 months away.
Yeah.
And you've forgotten the intricacies around what exactly you did and why you did it in a certain way. So I always try and give feedback as soon as I can after a matter is completed. The way that we do our appraisals here, I think I mentioned earlier, we have a mid-seat appraisal, which is quite informal, and what I would do for that, so that's just me and Tam, and I would go around and just spend 5 minutes with the people that Tam's worked for and ask for feedback on specific things that she's done well. And then in the appraisal, we'll just have a quick conversation about what Tam's enjoyed, what she's found most rewarding, what she has found challenging and maybe why, and also what she hasn't done very much of that she would like to do.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of SRA list of competencies, if you like, that trainees have to tick off. So if we found that she was kind of particularly lacking in drafting or meeting or whatever it would be, that we would try and kind of address that in the second half of the seat. And then the end of seat's a little bit more formal because you've got a form to fill in, haven't you?
Yeah,
which is quite long. And the process is going to be largely the same in terms of getting feedback from others. But the only difference really will be that Andrew, who's the contentious partner, will sit in on that as well, and give his feedback and sign off before Tam moves on to private client.
Oh, is that where you're?
Yeah, I'm going to Landed Estates.
And what is your best lesson that you've learnt so far as a trainee? And I think we should ask Emily this question as well as a supervisor.
This is the hardest question, I think.
Do you want me to go first?
I think for me, the best lesson that I ever kind of told myself when I was a trainee always to remember, and I really try, but the older I get, the harder it is not to forget what it was like to be a trainee.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know anything about construction. You don't necessarily know how to behave in an office. If you've not, like me, I hadn't done that at all. So I always try and just be a friendly kind of sounding board or a friendly face. So yeah, I think that's the big thing for me, I think.
Yeah,
Tam?
That's good. I think, well, you've already touched on one of them actually, that this was something that Emily kind of stressed quite early on, that not everything I get given is going to be the most exciting piece of work. but to really see it as kind of part of the learning process, and the idea that you've already mentioned that I shouldn't be giving anything out that I haven't done before. So the 2-year process is a really good way of making sure that kind of you've got all of those like building blocks, and that I know what it should look like. And you know, even if it's just compiling some correspondence files or something, on the face of it it's not that exciting, but actually when it's a really key piece of kind of documents for serving proceedings, and having that as something to look back on, then when you can kind of conceptualise it and put it into like the picture on how it works, then it actually becomes a lot more interesting. And I think specifically for construction, it's a really busy department. There's lots of work most of the time, so putting really good systems in place and learning how to manage the workload, and not being scared to go to the partner and say, I've actually got too much on, can I give it to you tomorrow? And kind of that is just learning to always ask for when it's needed, and
that's a really
then
good point.
feeding stuff down and just being organised and just making sure that you've kind of written everything down, you know, you're on top of things, but not feeling daunted by the fact that actually not everything is as urgent as it may seem, and just to feed that back to people, and then they'll be really realistic and open with you about when they actually need it, rather than just being slightly stressed behind the scenes going, I've got too much to do.
It's always good to kind of have know what your deadlines are.
Absolutely.
Do you ever write a list and then tick things off that you've already done?
A big list.
I'm a huge lister. I have lists, sub-lists, like sub-lists. You wouldn't believe it. I probably spend more time doing lists than I do actually doing work. But
well, you can tick podcast off your list now, because you've officially finished. Thank you both so much for joining me today, and if listeners want to hear any more about the firm, you can head over to our website, forsters.co.uk. You can visit all our various social media feeds, so we've got Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter, and if you want to hear any more of our podcasts, you can use your usual podcast provider, including SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. And again, many thanks to you both for joining me.
Thanks, Miri.
Thank you.
Until next time, goodbye.